The sun hung like a noose over Rattler's Gap, stretching long shadows from the canyons across the brittle earth. Wind moved through the empty town like it had somewhere to be, stirring dust and silence. No one spoke much in Rattler's Gap, and no one stayed long. The land was hard, the people harder, and the only law that mattered rode on the wind or pointed a gun. She came in without a word, riding a tired mule that looked half-starved and blind in one eye. Her hat was pulled low, her duster stained with travel and time. Nobody recognized her, but then again, nobody cared to. Strangers passed through, sometimes looking for work, sometimes looking to disappear. This one looked like both. What made folks pause, though, was how she moved. Light didn't quite catch her right, as if she walked just ahead of it. Or maybe it was afraid to touch her. Old Miss Calhoun swore up and down she cast no shadow when she passed the church steps. At the saloon, doors creaked under her hand. The piano stopped mid-note. Men looked up from their drinks, measured her in glances. Not a flicker of fear in her step. She crossed the floor, slow but certain, and sat at the far end of the bar. Her voice, when it came, was low and smooth like creek water running over stone. Water, cold if you've got it. That was all. No name, no smile, not even a glance at the eyes watching her from every corner. By nightfall, stories had already begun. A bounty hunter, a lost daughter come back to kill, a ghost from the war. The bartender, Lyle Goss, leaned across the counter and whispered, "She don't talk much, but I've seen killers walk quieter." Trouble rode into town the next day in a roar of hooves and laughter. 6 men, dust-caked and grinning, their rifles slung low and law forgotten. The Bledsoe gang. Caleb Bledsoe led them, tall, lean, with a preacher's voice and a devil's temper. He wore a revolver with notches carved into the handle and a red scarf knotted tight at his throat. Some said it belonged to a marshal he once shot through the eye. They came for supplies, drinks, and fear, the kind they could smell on a man before he even looked their way. Folks scattered, pretending to sweep porches or mend fences. Only the stranger stayed seated, her drink untouched, eyes hidden beneath the brim. Caleb sauntered in, boots loud on the saloon floor. His boys fanned out behind him, whooping and jeering, slapping backs and kicking stools aside. The air turned thick with smoke and sweat. "That's the quietest damn saloon I ever walked into," Caleb drawled, his grin too wide. "Ain't no one got stories to tell." He turned slowly, eyes scanning, and landed on her. She didn't move. "Well now," he said, stepping closer, "ain't you just a picture of mystery? Don't reckon we've met." Still she said nothing. One of his men, a stocky brute with a broken nose and an appetite for cruelty, leaned in and grinned. "What do you say, sweetheart? You with anyone?" She raised her eyes. They were gray, cold, old, the kind of old that didn't come from years, but from what had been seen in them. "I'm not with anyone," she said, calm. The brute chuckled. "Well then," he said, glancing to the others, "she's ours now." He reached for her arm. His hand never made it. There was a flash, movement so fast it seemed unnatural. A twist of her wrist, a crack of bone. The man dropped with a howl, clutching his hand like it was on fire. His revolver skittered across the floor. Everyone went still. Caleb's grin faded. The stranger stood. Not tall, not broad, but everything in her stance said don't. The way a coiled rattler says it, without sound. "Touch me again," she said, voice like gravel under boot, "and you'll leave with less than fingers." No one laughed. Not this time. The injured man groaned on the floor. Caleb looked down at him, then back at her. "You've made a mistake," he said softly. "Not yet," she replied, and stepped past him, calm as dawn. She walked out into the heat, wind tugging at her coat. The saloon doors creaked closed behind her. Caleb knelt beside his man, muttering something too low to hear. The other gang members exchanged glances. Something had shifted, the kind of shift you feel more than see, like the moment before a storm breaks. Sheriff Mullins watched it all from his office window. He hadn't left his chair. Too old, too tired, and too used to burying men after Bledsoe passed through. He lit his pipe with shaking fingers and muttered to himself, This ain't gonna pass quiet. Not this time. By sundown, she was gone. No one saw her leave. Not even the boy who slept in the hay behind the livery. But someone had followed the prints in the dust, small, deliberate, headed north toward the canyon lands. The next morning, one of Bledsoe's men was missing, and those who had seen the woman walk through town were no longer so sure they had seen a woman at all. They said no name, no shadow, but now they whispered she had a reason to come. And somewhere out there in the canyons, the reason waited like a loaded rifle. And the Bledsoe gang, for the first time, looked like they might be afraid. The desert didn't speak, but the canyon did. Wind wound through the jagged veins of Dead Crow Canyon, howling low like it remembered screams. The walls rose in sandstone tiers, riddled with forgotten trails and hiding spots best left untouched. It was no place for the unwelcome, and the stranger had gone straight there. 2 of Caleb Bledsoe's men rode out before sunrise. Jace and Marin, both mean-eyed and half-drunk, convinced they'd find her sleeping in the dust. They laughed as they rode, spitting tobacco and wagering on who'd drag her back first. Jace was sure she was just a lost squatter with a temper. Marin said she was a bounty hunter with a fake name and no teeth under the scarf. They didn't laugh coming back. Only one returned. Jace stumbled into town near dusk, face bloodied, shirt torn, and one eye purple with swelling. He rode a borrowed horse. Marin's gone. The whole saloon fell silent as he collapsed into the dirt outside Mullen's office, breathing like he'd seen the devil himself. "She was waiting for us," he rasped. The sheriff crouched beside him. "Where's Marin?" Jace didn't answer, just looked past him, eyes darting like a man counting shadows. "She knew our names." That night, the saloon filled with whispers thicker than the smoke. A few old-timers at the back table said the woman must be part Apache, raised by wolves or ghosts. Some said she'd fought in the war dressed as a man. One story claimed she'd taken out a whole Confederate camp with a hammer and nothing else. Nobody agreed, but none of them laughed. Sheriff Mullen sat in silence, puffing his pipe, eyes fixed on the fire. He hadn't spoken much since Bledsoe came through the last time, leaving 2 widows and a bullet-scarred church behind. But this woman who walked through town and left fear behind her like footprints, she stirred something he thought long dead. "You recognize her?" Lyle asked, handing over a fresh bottle. "Not her, but the look," Mullins said. "Saw it once before. Back at Cold Creek in '63. Right before the charges went off, and 20 boys vanished in smoke." Lyle blinked. "You think she's military?" "I think," the sheriff muttered. "We're standing in the middle of a reckoning." Caleb Bledsoe didn't like being challenged. He liked it even less when his men started to mumble and avoid his eyes. Jace sat hunched in the corner of the saloon now, staring at the floor, refusing drink, repeating, "She didn't blink." Caleb listened, jaw tightening, then stood. "That woman thinks she can scare us into the hills, into hiding." His voice cracked the air. "We ride at dawn. I'll deal with her myself." That night, he walked the perimeter of the town, fingering the ivory grip of his revolver. Not out of fear, at least not yet, but out of a strange and rising caution. The kind he hadn't felt since his pa was still alive, and the war was something a boy watched from a cornfield. He remembered something his father used to say. When the desert goes quiet, it's not resting, it's watching. Dead Crow Canyon was quiet. The next morning, 5 riders set out. Caleb led them, his red scarf tied tighter than usual. They followed the narrow trails leading between burnt-out mesquite and rock ledges, where the heat shimmered and shadows shifted when you weren't looking straight. By noon, they found Marin's horse, tethered unharmed. No sign of blood, just a line of footprints vanishing into the cliffs. "Trap," muttered one of the men. "Good," Caleb growled. "Let her try." Deeper they went, into the mouth of the canyon. The air cooled and narrowed, thick with echoes. Buzzards circled above like they knew something the men didn't. Signs began to appear. A spent shell casing, left in plain sight on a rock. A boot print leading into gravel, but none coming out. A half-burnt tobacco roll, still warm. They slowed, nerves tugging. Then came the sound, sharp and close. A rock slide behind them, sudden and absolute. Dust surged like a wave, filling their eyes and throats. Horses reared. Guns flew from holsters too late. When the dust settled, she stood above them, on a ledge not 20 feet up, silhouetted against the sun. The same coat, the same hat, no rifle in hand, just her eyes, steady and measuring. "I told you not to follow." Caleb looked up, hand still on his revolver. "You know my name," he called. "I know what you've done." Silence stretched. "You think this is justice?" Caleb asked, voice rising. "You think you scare me with your tricks?" "I'm not here to scare you," she said. One of the men raised his rifle. A snap rang out, a rope cut from above. A stack of rocks dropped like judgment, burying him in a sudden avalanche. The others didn't move. Caleb stared up at her, jaw clenched. "What do you want?" She didn't answer, just turned and disappeared behind the ledge, as if the canyon had opened up to take her. They scrambled up after her, but she was gone, no trace, no prints, no sound. Back in town, the wind picked up again. Sheriff Mullins stood on the church steps, listening. "She's not just after them," he whispered. "She's digging up something we tried to bury." And somewhere in the canyon, a whisper moved with the wind. A name buried long ago. A reason sharp as a blade. The reckoning had only begun. In the canyon's quiet belly, she moved like memory, half there, half faded. Where the rocks narrowed into a passage no map showed, she made her camp beneath an overhang of sun-blasted stone. The fire she built was small, low-smoked, and silent. Above her, vultures circled again. They remembered war. Her name had not been spoken in 17 years, not since she buried it with a uniform that never fit, and a boy who didn't come back. They'd called her Mags then, short for Magnolia, which suited her once, before the gunpowder and the long marches carved the softness from her. She was 15 when she bound her chest and lied to the enlistment man. Said her name was Marcus Lane. Wrote it on the paper with shaking fingers and didn't look back. Cold Creek, 63. That was the furnace. Her unit marched through a town already dying, where the air stank of rot and cannon smoke. The men were green, their boots too new, their voices too eager. Mags watched them one by one turn from boys into bodies. And when the officers died, she took command, quietly, fiercely. They followed her because she didn't hesitate. That was all that mattered when the sky opened with artillery and the earth turned red. She earned the name the Sparrow, not for grace, but for how she flew under the eyes of death, light and fast, never catching more than a scratch while others fell. But they never saw her, not really. She was just another shadow in the ranks. Until the end. It was near the river, just before dawn. Her unit was cornered, backs to the bend, the enemy coming fast through the brush. 20 men, a few bleeding out, some barely boys. She built traps, laid dynamite stolen from rail tracks, set snares between the trees. What came next was smoke and blood and screaming steel. When it cleared, only 4 of them stood. She among them, coated in soot and someone else's blood, her disguise torn, her truth laid bare. They stared wide-eyed, not in horror, but in reverence. No one turned her in. The war had stripped them all too bare for that. But war ends like thunder. It crashes loud, then drifts into silence. She walked away with nothing but a bitter metal and a wound in her thigh that never quite healed right. She drifted west, nameless again, built fences for widows, cut trails through mountain passes, worked cattle ranches where no one asked questions, always moving, until word reached her ears that Caleb Bledsoe and his gang had burned a home in Kansas. A widow and her boy inside. Said it was a mistake. Said they were aiming for someone else. The widow's name was Anna Lane, Mag's sister. No graves to visit. Nothing left but ash. That was 2 years ago. She hadn't stopped moving since. The canyon was where she'd lured them, step by step, memory by memory. It was where she'd bring them down. And now Caleb Bledsoe was pacing the dry basin below her, his men scattered like coals from a kicked fire. She watched from the ridge, unseen, like she always was. She didn't hate them. Not exactly. Hate burned too quick. What she carried was colder. a weight of justice that demanded to be paid in coin no sheriff carried. Below, Bledsoe kicked a rock hard. "You know what I think?" he called to the open sky. "I think you're just a ghost with a grudge, hiding behind tricks and shadows." She rose slowly, silhouette cutting against the cliff edge. "No ghost," she said. Her voice echoed once, clean as a bell. "And I'm not hiding." The men jumped. Caleb turned, revolver drawn. "Then come down and finish it." "I will," she said, "but not until you understand who I am." And for the first time, she pulled her coat aside, revealing the faded Union patch stitched into the lining. Beneath it, a knife worn smooth from years of use. Not ceremonial, not decorative, practical, clean, used. "I was at Cold Creek," she said. "I walked men out of fire and into legend. I led them when their captains bled dry. You think I'm here to scare you, Caleb? You think this is about pride?" He stared up, something unreadable shifting in his eyes. "This is for Anna," she said, and vanished behind the ridge. Gunfire erupted behind his men a second later. One dropped, a shot from nowhere. The rest scattered, yelling. The canyon swallowed the sound. Bledsoe crouched, aiming blindly at shadows, sweat pouring down his neck. "Coward," he screamed. "You want revenge, then fight like it." No answer, just the sound of hooves above, moving fast. She was splitting them, taking them one by one, the way she'd been taught. Hit and vanish, distract and strike. It wasn't rage that moved her, it was discipline. The war had taught her to survive. But what it never taught her, what she had to learn alone, was what to do after. Justice was not clean. It was never fast. It came in pieces, often earned in silence. By dusk, only 2 of his men remained. They huddled in a narrow cut of rock, eyes wide, guns shaking. One begged Caleb to run. The other simply wept. Above them, on the ridge, the wind moved, and the shape that followed it had no fear left in her at all. Tomorrow would come, and with it reckoning. Rattler's Gap was never meant to hold memory. It was a slit of dry land between 2 mesas, a no-name crease where cattle strayed and coyotes died in circles. But that morning, it remembered. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder. The sun rose pale, as if reluctant to bear witness. And in the center of the gap, Caleb Bledsoe stood alone. His coat was torn at the seams. His men were gone, scattered, buried, or too afraid to return. His revolver was down to 1 bullet. Still, he stood like a man who couldn't believe the war had come for him after all this time. Across from him, she walked, not creeping from the rocks, not dropping from some ledge. She came straight down the dry path like it was a church aisle, and she'd waited long enough to give her sermon. Her boots kicked dust, slow and steady. Her coat swayed open, the worn blue patch at her side, catching the morning light. Bledsoe raised the revolver. His hand shook. "You should have stayed hidden," he said. "I did," she replied, her voice a rasp carried on heat. "For 17 years. And I didn't crawl out for you." "No," he smirked, lips cracked and bitter. "Then what is this, if not revenge?" She stopped 10 paces from him. "It's the end of a debt." He barked a laugh, but it was hollow. "And who do I owe?" "Anna Lane." The name struck harder than a bullet. His smirk twitched. "That fire wasn't my doing. Orders change hands. Mistakes happen. You burned a woman and her son because your man couldn't tell north from a prayer." "Collateral." "No," she said and stepped closer. "That word's for generals and bankers. What you did was murder, and you didn't even look twice." He lifted the gun. "You kill me. That makes you no better." She stopped. "Difference is, I waited. I listened. I made sure you were still the man who did it. And you are." He fired. The shot rang out across the canyon walls, echoing like a curse. She didn't fall. The bullet hit the dirt 2 feet to her left. His hand dropped empty. His face crumpled, not in fear, but in some exhausted defeat. "That's all I had," he whispered. "Didn't even aim right." She reached into her coat and drew her knife. Not quickly, not with threat. She walked up to him, weapon low, until they stood face to face in the quiet mouth of the desert. "I'm not going to kill you," she said. He blinked, stunned. "What?" You're going to walk out of this canyon, all the way to Mullins. You're going to confess to what you did in Kansas, and what you did since. And then you're going to hang. You think I'll just... She stepped forward, and her voice dropped to a blade's edge. You'll do it because if you don't, I'll find you again. And next time, I won't waste the mercy. He stared at her, lips parted, then something broke in him. The last sliver of defiance turned to ash. He dropped the revolver, fell to his knees. You think they'll believe you? He muttered. No, she said, but they'll believe you. She turned her back on him, knife vanishing beneath her coat, walked toward the rising light like the story was already written. Behind her, Bledsoe stayed kneeling, the dust curling around him like judgment. By noon, she was back in town. Rattler's Gap's few remaining souls stepped out from porches and saloons and shaded windows, watching her with a silence that felt like prayer. Sheriff Mullins met her outside the chapel. He's coming in, he asked. She nodded once. You sure you don't want to testify? She looked past him. My war's not in that room. He hesitated. What's your name? She paused, then gave it. Magnolia Lane. He removed his hat. That's a name worth remembering. She didn't answer, just walked past him, past the jailhouse, past the murmuring crowd, out beyond the last fence of the town. She paused and looked back once. The wind stirred the dust around her boots. She disappeared over the ridge, and though some say they never saw her again, Rattler's Gap did not forget. Not the woman, not the war, not the justice done beneath that hard, pale sky.